Hi, folks. I'm Dennis Foley. Thanks so much for joining us. By this time, we probably should know something about Islam and Muslims. Well, I'm still learning, and perhaps you are too. A personal conversation with George Washington University's renowned professor of Islamic Studies. His name is Dr. Seyyed Nasr. Next on This Is America. Dr. Nasr, so good to be with you once again. See you once again. This book that you've written, The Heart of Islam, Enduring Values for Humanity, it's turned out to be rather a classic, isn't it, huh?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'm glad to be able to be here again. And the book has found a place for itself, general public readings of Islam, and both in universities and places outside of universities had quite a bit of reception, yes.
What is at the heart of Islam?
The oneness of God and means of access to God as the one.
God is the one. God is the one. Do you have, when you talk about God as the one, and in Islam it's Allah, isn't it?
Allah, yes. That's just the Arabic name for God.
Is there a picture, is there an image, is there a concept in your mind as to what Allah is?
It's a very good question, because the one, the absolute, cannot be presented in images. And in fact, one cannot have an image. But that not being able to have an image itself directs one towards one's conception of the divinity. That is, what is in one's mind is a reality that transcends all limitation, all definition, all otherness, all relativity, and who at the same time governs the world, loves his creation, and to whom one returns. But there are no images in the visual sense of the divinity in Islam.
So when you're praying, you don't have a picture in your mind?
No, but you have the feeling of a presence, the presence before the divine. It's very similar to Judaism. Judaism and Islam share in the emphasis upon God as the one. Say your Lord is one. And in Islam also, when we pray, we have a feeling that we're standing before the divine reality, but there's no image in the mind because image involves a contour, a form, and God is beyond forms, he's formless.
If you said to, how about beyond gender as well, of course?
Yes, he is beyond gender, although we usually use the pronoun he. Yeah. But in certain poetry and so forth, God has even been referred to as she. That's not totally alien to the Islamic worldview, but so he's beyond gender.
Somebody came to you and said, you believe in Islam. Does the word itself have a translation? As what does Islam mean?
It has two meanings, peace and surrender.
It does.
Both of these words are in the root word from which Islam comes in Arabic, and it means that you surrender yourself to God and you receive peace as its consequence.
And how about the word Muslim? Is that a word that can translate? Does that have a meaning, or is it just...
No, that's just a construction on the word Islam in Arabic, meaning a person who practices Islam.
Okay.
That is, he who practices Islam is called a Muslim.
So you surrender and you get peace.
That's
so
right.
It's acceptance, right?
Acceptance
of the way things are?
God has given us, not that one should surrender to evil and be totally passive. That's very different from passivity. Surrender to God is not passivity. It's like many Christians who wrote about even the holy war against one's ego. We have something very similar to that, against injustice, against all of the evils in the world. But it means even in that battle against evil to surrender oneself to what God has willed, and not just human ego or human will and all the deviations which exist in the human soul in this fallen state.
Does God believe that we are imperfect, terribly imperfect?
Yes, he does. He knows that we are imperfect.
He does, he does. Yes. And he's still with us, isn't he? Huh?
Absolutely. Islam is very realist in that sense. That is, all the laws of Islam are revealed with awareness of the limitations of the human state.
Now, a couple of questions. If you said to someone, this is what I believe, what would you say? I believe what? Just a couple of thoughts that you believe.
First of all, I believe that there is such a thing as absolute reality and truth, whom we call God, who is and is the source of all that exists. Secondly, that this divine reality has compassion and mercy and love, and that's why he's created the world. According to Islamic view, God created the world because he loved to be known, and love permeates the world, and all chapters of the Quran, except one, which is connected to the previous chapter, begin with the formula, in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful.
So you believe in creation, huh?
We believe that creation, yes, I believe that the world is created and was created by God. It's not eternal, and it has a cause.
The Prophet Muhammad, and it's spelled, is it spelled with a U, M-U?
That's the most correct, but it can also be spelled with an M-O. That's the Persian Urdu pronunciation.
Okay.
The Arabic is Muhammad, and so it's M-U.
So what year are we talking about? What's the history of Islam?
7th century. The Prophet was born probably in 570 A.D.
Okay.
in the city of Mecca, which is still in Saudi Arabia, the center of Islam, and into a noble family. His father died early. His mother brought him up, but she also died early, so he was brought up as an orphan by his uncle, who was a very powerful man in the most powerful tribe in Arabia. But from the beginning, he had a great love for God. Even then, he was not a polytheist, like most of the Arabs were, worshipping various idols. He used to go off into the desert to be by himself.
Was he influenced? Did he have like a divine revelation from God?
I was just coming to that, absolutely. At the age of 40, we believe that while he was contemplating in a cave on a hill outside of Mecca, that the Archangel Gabriel appeared to him and brought him the revelation. The revelation of Islam is the Quran. The Quran is, in a sense, more important than the Prophet. Because the Prophet is a channel through which the Word of God has reached humanity.
So Muhammad is not God, or not...
Absolutely
but
not.
Divine? No, not divine.
No, but he is the most perfect of human beings. Divinity belongs to the divine alone.
To God
alone, yes.
So he, now the Quran, we say Quran, but it's K-O-R-A-N, but then it can be spelled Q-U-A, and then a little
because its Arabic pronunciation is Quran, and that sound qa does not exist in English, so it now has been changed to K, and the glottal stop is not used in English in that way, so it's called Quran, which is from your...
So are these all the revelations, or these are the teachings are in the Quran, right?
That's right. During a 23-year period from the time that the Archangel first appeared to him until his death, the Prophet first in Mecca, where he lived, later on in Medina, another city in Arabia north of that, where he migrated, received these revelations from time to time.
How was it all accepted at the beginning? I mean, I don't want to be flip about this question, but how did the religion and him as a being, how did that all take off? That's the only words I can use.
That's quite remarkable, because how could a man with so few means bring about one of the greatest transformations in human history, affecting all the way from the walls of China to France within a century? This is a very good question. At first, when he received the revelation, of course, with a sense of awe and fear of what has happened, and the first person who accepted what he had received and who had faith in what he had said was his wife, Khadija. So the first Muslim after the Prophet was a woman, and she plays a very, very important role in the history of Islam, followed by Abu Bakr and Ali. Abu Bakr was a grown man. Ali was a young boy of 12. He was the first male, but he was not an adult to accept the call of the Prophet. And these three people, along with the Prophet, were the first Muslims. And very soon, a small group of people assembled around them. And during the first 10, 11 years of his mission as a prophet, when he lived in Mecca, the number began to grow, because he was known already even before becoming a prophet for his honesty. He was called Al-Amin, the trusted one, and he had aura, of course, authority about him.
What message was he spreading at that time that it started to catch on?
Most important message is that there is only one God who should be worshipped, not
now, what
these
were those
idols.
people believing at that time?
Each tribe has its own idols. There was a kind of idol worship, not dissimilar to the Semitic religions of Mesopotamia at the time of their decadence. when they began to have idols of various kinds and statues and so forth.
So they were kind of ripe for somebody to come in with a positive message, huh?
Definitely, definitely.
So how many people do we have following? How many people are Muslims today?
1,250,000,000 up to 300 million people.
Okay, now this is something that's confusing to some people. I think that a lot of people would think that they're all Arab. They're not, are they?
Absolutely not. The first contact that the West had with the Islamic world was through the Arabic part of the Islamic world. Okay, so
so what are those countries that make up the
Arabic part of the Islamic world? Starts with Mauritania, and then Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and south of them, Chad and Mali, and of course half of Nigeria and other small black African countries. Then coming north, Egypt, and then Saudi Arabia, Yemen, the Emirates, north of that, Syria and half of Lebanon, and then Iraq and Kuwait are the easternmost, and Sudan is the southernmost state in the eastern part of the Arab world.
But now, what do I have in my mind about Indonesia? They have
that's
huge...
only the Arab world.
That's the Arab world, but
that's
where the Islamic world is like huge in Indonesia, isn't it?
Not only in Indonesia, of the 1,300,000,000 Muslims, only about 1/5 are Arabs. 4/5 are not Arabs.
Oh, okay.
Even before we get to Indonesia, the highest population of Muslims in the world is in the Indian subcontinent.
Oh, okay, okay.
There are easily over 400, 450 million people.
Now, let me ask you this. Is it just a religion, or is it a culture as well?
It is both. The first two people to embrace Islam were first the Arabs and the Persians.
Okay.
And after that, the Turks, and then the Indian Muslims and Malays and black Africans and other groups. And Islam never tried to destroy the culture of these people, but the cultures were transformed, Islamicized. And so there are distinctions on the cultural level between, let's say, Persian culture and Sudanese culture. But they are both very deeply Muslim.
Now, what is the goal of life for a Muslim?
To live according to God's will.
And that's written in the Quran, right?
That's right. And now, the Quran says, we created you so that you will worship us. That is, God created men and women so they would worship God. That is God's will. And worship.
So what does it mean to be a good Muslim?
It means not only the 5 daily prayers, the main acts of worship, the rituals, but also means to live according to the divine law. That is, to be good, to do good, to be charitable, to be just. The same great virtues that Christianity and other major religions of the world also emphasize.
Islam is not hostile to other religions, is it? I mean, from what I read, they hold Mary and the Christian tradition in very, very high regard. And Jesus Christ they hold in high regard. They hold the Jewish faith in high regard.
First of all the sacred scriptures of the world, none is as universalist as the Quran. The Quran continuously refers to the prophets, the books in the plural, and says explicitly that we have sent, God has sent a prophet to every people, and a divine message to every people. And even the Quran says explicitly, we could have created you one people, but we created different people, each with his own religion or her own religion, so you could vie with each other in goodness. Historically, Islam has a pretty good record. Of course, it's not perfect. No religion's record is perfect. But in comparison, let's say, to what happened in the West, where you had pogroms against the Jews during the time of Hitler, and in 1492, and most recently in Bosnia, and here and there, and also against the Muslims, Christians and Jews lived as minorities in the Islamic world for a long, long time, and Christians still do. Most of the Jews migrated to Israel after 1948, but some of them are still there.
But on the other hand, in the last number of years, first of all, last 5, 10, 15 years, the interest in Islam just took off. But that was somewhat coincided, and I have to ask you this question, the Muslim thinking on things like war and jihad and martyrdom and terrorism, because that's sticking in people's
yes,
craw,
of course,
you know?
Of course, because...
Help me, what went wrong there?
What went wrong is the following. During the colonial period, the West dominated completely over most of Asia and Africa, no doubt.
Yeah.
These great major civilizations, the Chinese, the Indian, Japanese, Islamic, they were the major civilization of these continents, all became dominated by the West. The consequence of that was that in the Chinese and Japanese worlds, religion began to weaken. To the extent that Marxism took over China, and Japan, after its defeat in the Second World War, decided to become like a Western nation. It did not try to assert itself as a Buddhist Shinto nation. And faith became very weak. Many people say that the Japanese are the least religious people in the world. I don't believe that, but there's a great deal of lack of interest in religion in Japan. This did not happen in Hinduism and in Islam. That is, these two religions, the religions remained very strong. In Hinduism, which is confined only to India, because of Mahatma Gandhi and also because of the experience with the British, they developed, at least outwardly, what is called world's biggest democracy, that they did not challenge Western ideas on the political level. But inwardly, of course, the casteism has continued. A lot of things are going on in India which are very different from what goes on in Europe. The Islamic world at first began to emulate the West like the rest of Asia, try to copy Western models. And as long as it was doing that, nobody talked about Islamic terrorists and violence and things like that. However, several events added to each other to cause the Muslims to try to preserve their own identity and not simply to copy the West.
And they were?
They were, first of all, the lack of success of modernist models between the two wars, the coming of Kemal Atatürk to Turkey, of modernism in Egypt, in Iran, and places like that. They did not really fully succeed. Much of the culture, many of the people were dissatisfied with what went on. The religion was threatened, and Islam continued to remain very strong in these countries in one form or another. Some countries more, some countries less, but strong in all these countries. Secondly, this lack of success led to, in fact, either political repression, governments which were pro-Western, but very repressive, and defended by the West, and that still goes on in most Islamic countries.
Yes.
And very little economic benefit in comparison with what they were expecting.
So you got the haves and the have-nots.
And they increased.
Mostly with the have-nots.
The haves and the have-nots, the difference increased with coming of modernization in the Islamic world. It did not decrease, because these were based on models which did not accord with the culture of the people to a large extent. Then you had political events that took place one after another. The partition of Palestine, the question of Kashmir, the dispossession of Muslims in the then Soviet Union, which had gone on since the time of Lenin, but it got much worse with Stalin, and many, many other political elements, all of which had to do with the West and the Islamic world. It's very strange.
So you got a head crunch?
You got a head crunch. The Algerian War of Independence caused the death of 1 million Algerians or thereabouts, a very, very cruel fight to gain independence. And all of this led from the 1970s to a feeling within the Islamic world of the need to go back to their own roots, especially the loss of the 1967 war by the Arabs, which put an end to Arab nationalism as a serious ideology. Arab nationalism tried to take the place of Islam among many Arabs, as Iranian and Turkish nationalism had tried to do in Iran and Turkey. And as a result of this, people tried to revive Islam in what we call political Islam arose again. And it isn't something that's unique to Islam. Until European civilization was secularized, all Christian kings ruled in the name of Christ and Christianity. All the knights had big crosses on their dress. In this country, the Puritans in New England established a theocracy in
Massachusetts. But let's keep it in the 2000s now.
No, that's very important. That's very, very important. When you make that statement, that means that all other civilizations should follow the trajectory of the development of the West. That is what has happened in the West between Oliver Cromwell and the 2000s or now 21st should be followed by all other cultures. That doesn't necessarily happen. That doesn't necessarily happen. So you have a turmoil within the Islamic world between those who wanted to go back to Islamic identity, the modernists who still held tremendous power, and they still do, a minority that rules over most of the Islamic world, and then the other side of the coin of modernism, which is fundamentalism. All of this is called Islamic fundamentalism, was not there before modernism came. Fundamentalism is the other
reaction
side of the reaction. Like in Christianity, these Christian fundamentalists, these extremists, they didn't exist in 1700.
So we got some people, the fundamentalists, and are those the people who are?
And they're the ones, not all of them, but one wing of it decided that peaceful ways speaking is no use. So they took recourse to force. And that's the way the West had dealt with the Islamic world since the colonial period.
That was not a good model.
That was not, the West was not a good model, but the West refuses to accept that in many ways. That is when American or British forces or French forces or Dutch forces...
So they copied a bad model.
They copied a model which...
But still exists today, right?
It still exists today.
Yes, now, does that create in our own country, because of a lack of understanding, prejudice and stereotyping and discrimination, and how that plays out nowadays?
Oh, absolutely, because there are certain people for whom this politically expedient and important to do that. First of all, the vast majority of Muslims are against terrorism and extremism. Terrorism against Islamic law, that is to kill innocent people, is against Islamic law. The Quran says explicitly, to kill one innocent person is like killing the whole of humanity.
But don't they say something like, you know, like it's for a better good or something like that?
But the vast majority of Muslims do not accept that.
So how do we get over that hurdle? I mean, that people can see that more clearly.
That's programs like yours. That is essentially, first of all, you have to learn Islam in America from people who, if they were to speak about Islam in the bazaar of Cairo, they would not throw rocks at them. That is authentic. If I want to learn about Judaism, I have to go to an important rabbi whose voice reflects the Jewish tradition, not some extremist rabbi whom nobody would accept. The same with Christianity. If you want to learn about Protestant or Catholic Christianity, you have to go to mainstream thinkers. This has not been done in the United States to a large extent. Even many people with Muslim names have been chosen who are extremists within the Islamic spectrum at the present moment. I respect what they're doing, but they don't represent the mainstream. What America has to learn is the main tradition of Islam, what now people call moderate Islam. That is the main historical tradition, which still is followed by 95% of Muslims.
So as we're coming down to the last couple of minutes here, what is your because first of all, would you come back on another occasion and continue our education?
I think this mutual understanding is so important that if God gives me the energy and time, I'll be glad to come back.
Thank you. What is your biggest frustration and your biggest hope?
My biggest frustration is that you have a lot of misinformation fed to the American people, usually fine people who have a lot of virtues in them, but they're also gullible in many ways. They accept what is told them by the media. And many of these things which are told are not true. I mean, you have a lot of people called experts who really do not know that much about the Islamic world. That's why all the major events are never predicted by these people. It's always Monday morning quarterbacking, as we say in America. But my greatest hope is the goodness of people deep down. The fact that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are cousins in the same family, that most of the values are really the same, both social values and individual values, and these have to be brought out. For example, the American fathers, the fathers of the American Constitution and the American nation, they said a lot of things which are very similar to what Muslims have said over the ages. Now, everybody did not listen to Muslims, everybody has not listened to them in America, obviously. But there are a lot of common factors, and my hope is to bring those out before we have a complete polarization of the world, which will be to the detriment of both the Islamic world and the West, in the worst kind possible.
I want to call people's attention to your book, The Heart of Islam, Seyyed Hossein Nasr, the author, Enduring Values for Humanity. We thank you so much for learning more, teaching us more. You're the teacher, I'm the student, and folks out there hopefully are learning with you. And I do hope that your schedule will permit you to return in the near future.
I hope so. I'll be saying in Arabic, inshallah, God willing, I hope to see you again.